Hello, welcome back to the Eddie V Show. It's good to be back with you for another episode, for the 60th episode, a huge achievement. We'll get right into it. We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff today. It's going to be a big show, a lot of topics to cover. So let's dive in. I will be covering some SSPX stuff. If you haven't heard, a little back and forth between Pope Leo and the SSPX. So we'll talk about that and some general SSPX stuff. I want to talk about briefly the birthright ruling from the Supreme Court that happened today, just to fill everyone in on that. We'll talk a little bit, hopefully, about St. Margaret Clitherow, a great saint, and just a couple of things from her, about her, in relation to a lot of things, different things, economics, feminism, all that great stuff. And then I want to talk about the gasoline situation or the oil situation in the US. I think it's important. There's people that are already talking about that and they know all the good stuff. The information doesn't get out. You have all these Republican shills. Anyway, we'll get into that. I think it's important to know for my audience, for my small but loyal audience. I think it's important for you to know. So we'll talk about that. It's going to be a great show. So let's get right into it. I want to first talk about the SSPX. So what happened was, if you are not familiar yet, is Pope Leo sent a letter to the SSPX basically saying do not consecrate those bishops, which I think is scheduled for tomorrow or later this week, something like that, early July. And he's basically saying don't do that. And then so that's that, which makes sense, obviously. And he's saying it in I guess a fatherly tone is what they would call it. And the SSPX acknowledged that. But then the head of the SSPX, he sent a return letter, and that's kind of where I want to jump in. Because the return letter, it sounds really nice. If you read it, you're like, oh, what a faithful guy. what a lovely guy, sending back this very nice letter to Pope Leo, calling him Most Holy Father, all this stuff. But I'll be honest, I do not like this letter. I think it's very pernicious, it's very false, and it's very just uppity. I don't like it at all. I'm not going to read you the whole thing. I won't read from it. You can look it up yourself. It's not that long. But he's basically saying, like, Pope Leo, we love you. We want to help the church. We're serving the church, but like we're not going to listen to anything you say. And like if you could be brave, you will unite us with you and do what we want. But we're going to do our thing. And it's like, geez Louise, I can't stand that. And I want to be clear too. I am a person, I love the Latin Mass. I love like that old-fashioned church. I love a good anathema. I like getting straight to the point. I don't like being super tolerant, super nice. I don't like the modern ways the church does things. I like fire and brimstone. I like Latin chants. I wouldn't consider myself someone who's a very fond of the post Vatican II kind of modus operandi. But having said that, schism is very obvious. I don't know why we have so much trouble identifying schism, identifying what the heck is going on with the SSPX and these other splinter groups. And honestly, the SSPX is probably thinking like Pope Leo is really mean or Pope Francis is really mean and all these other popes. I think they're too nice. And I think that it's like people are like, oh, look at them being so mean to the SSPX. It's a double standard. They won't do it to the gays and stuff like that. Whatever it is. I saw that the other day. I think it's just the same old rigmarole. I think they're being very nice. I think they've always been very nice to the SSPX, been very restrained because they're very obvious schismatics to me. So I want to get into that. And I want to briefly, I've covered this before, but I want to read from Vatican I and then kind of discuss what schism is briefly. Because I don't understand why this is such a problem. And, maybe I'm missing something. I've talked to people about the SSPX stuff. And people, people that I love, people that I trust tell me it's like canonically irregular. And that might be true. I forgot to look up. Dang it. Actually, I think I said I wasn't going to. But the people are saying, the papacy has said they are canonically irregular, which might be true. I'm not sure. But to me, when I just look at the definition of schism, I'm like, no, I think they're just schismatic. But I'm open to being wrong for sure. But with this new letter, I wanted to cover it again. So let's just talk a little bit about it. So I'm going to read from Vatican I, and then I want to relate it to Pius V and kind of what he was doing, because Council of Trent stuff. Very similar to Vatican II, kind of interesting. Council of Trent actions post Council of Trent. But let me say that again. You had the Council of Trent, and then you had some actions by Pope Pius V after the Council of Trent, trying to fulfill the mandate of the Council of Trent. So very similarly, you have Vatican II, and then you have Paul VI. Did I say Pius VI? Pius V for Council after the Council of Trent, and then Vatican II, Paul VI, trying to fulfill the mandate of Vatican II. Very similar situation, so I'll cover that. But first, I want to cover Vatican I. If Vatican I is great and is very, very abandoned, very not talked about. It has the answers to a lot of people's questions, and it's not only about infallibility. That's the big thing. There's a lot of stuff in it, so I really do recommend people read it. It is very long. It's a long one, but I do recommend people read the documents and the different sessions. But first, this is not related to what we're talking about, but I just thought this was super cool. So Pius V at the beginning, he does a profession of faith for himself. So this is going to be Pius IX for the Vatican I, 1870. And he says, this is from the 14th point of this profession of faith for himself. He says, likewise, all other things which have been transmitted, defined, and declared by the sacred canons and the ecumenical councils, especially the sacred Trent, I accept unhesitatingly and profess. In the same way, whatever is to the contrary and whatever heresies have been condemned, rejected, and anathematized by the Church, I too condemn, reject, and anathematize. This true Catholic faith, outside of which none can be saved, which I now freely profess and truly hold, is what I shall steadfastly maintain and confess, by the help of God, in all of its completeness and purity until my dying breath, and I shall do my best to ensure that all others do the same. This is what I, the same Pius, promise, vow, and swear. So help me God in these holy gospels of God. Super cool. that has nothing to do with really maybe a little bit, but it was just a really cool profession of faith from Pius IX. But this is what I want to get into. So when I'm bringing up Vatican I, I'm bringing us back to what can the Pope do? Because what are the SSPX doing? The SSPX are saying Vatican II gave a mandate to the Pope to reform the liturgy. Paul VI, as the true Pope of the Holy Catholic Church, reformed the liturgy or created a new missal, whatever you want to call it. And that this was against, I don't even know what you call it at this point. Like, he didn't have the power to do that. He uses power incorrectly and therefore it's invalid, et cetera, whatever they want to say. And so I want to go back and be like, what can the Pope do? What does the Pope have control of? Because they'll say like, oh, he doesn't have the power to do this. The Pope doesn't have power to either edit the liturgy, change the liturgy. That's one. Or a less extreme is like, he can reform and edit the liturgy, but he did it too much, or he did it in ways that we cannot allow as the SSPX or as Catholics or whatever, what have you, or as in accordance with the tradition of the Church, which I guess they make themselves the interpreter of. So I want to go back to Vatican I, because Vatican I speaks very strongly about who the Pope is and what he can and cannot do. So I want to read this. This is from the 4th session. This is point 2, I believe. And I'll also read from point 9. So he says here, the council says, wherefore we teach and declare that by divine ordinance the Roman Church possesses a preeminence of ordinary power over every other church, and that this jurisdictional power of the Roman pontiff is both episcopal and immediate. Both clergy and faithful of whatever right and dignity, both singly and collectively, are bound to submit to this power by the duty of hierarchical subordination and true obedience, and this not only in matters concerning faith and morals, but also in those which regard the discipline and government of the Church throughout the world. I'll repeat that last part. Not only in matters concerning faith and morals, but also in those which regard the discipline and government of the church throughout the world. People are going to disagree with that. Let me just finish this. So I'm going to go to 9 because this is kind of like the tying of the bow here with this. So then, if anyone says that the Roman pontiff has merely an office of supervision and guidance, and not the full and supreme power of jurisdiction over the whole church, and this not only in matters of faith and morals, but also in those which concern the discipline and government of the church dispersed throughout the whole world, or that he is only the principal part, but not the absolute fullness of the supreme power, or that this power of his is not ordinary and immediate, both over all and each of the churches, and over all and over all and each of the pastors and faithful, let him be anathema. I love that anathema. Bring back the anathemas. So my argument here is this is not specifically talking about editing the liturgy. I'm not that dumb. So I'm not going to pretend that that is specifically answering or solving your problem. But I'm just showing you how much power the Pope really has. He has all the power over the church. And as you heard mentioned, it's not just in faith and morals. I hear this all the time. It's like, no. When it comes to the church and what belongs to the church, he has absolute power over everything. That doesn't specifically mention the liturgy because then they'll just say, well, he can't change what the apostles passed down or something like that. But first we have to understand that he has this power and it's beyond what most people think it is. He has a ton of power. He has absolute power over the church. Okay, so what does that power look like? So for that, so when I'm looking at because when you say jurisdiction, when you say discipline and government, what does that even mean? Right? People will ask that if they're smart. So when I look at it, I'm like, well, we have to look at what previous popes did. And we'll ask the SSPX, did you not think that this pope could do that? And then that will, in theory, get them in a pickle, or anyone in a pickle that's doubting the authority of the pope to do these things. So let's move forward again. So when we go, and I didn't have one up for this. Hopefully this is just obvious. You can look it up. This is in quo primum. Primum. I'm not a Latin expert. But Pius we were at Vatican I. Sorry, this is a little confusing. But now we're going to go back to the Council of Trent because it's very similar to Vatican II in the way it was. I know it's not similar to Vatican II and the stuff it says, but it's kind of similar in that way that I talk about where you have a council mandate and then the Pope editing the liturgy. So, and we go back to the Council of Trent. In the Council of Trent, there is by the Council Fathers, a desire and a mandate given to the Pope to revise the liturgy and also to revise the breviary as well, but we won't talk about that because it's not as big of a deal. To revise both. So first of all, you have a council that, in theory, SSPX people accept, that desires the liturgy to be revised. So they might say it's the reason he wants to be revised is because it's probably gone liberal or something. I don't even know. But there's that desire. And then what you have after the council is Pius V following through on that mandate and him even acknowledging that mandate from the Council of Trent and desiring to fulfill that mandate from the church or the Council Fathers. So Pius V, with the power given to him, is going to eliminate, this is one of the first things he does. He eliminates all of the missals that cannot prove that they're over 200 years old. So this is about I should have looked up the day. I think 1571. So 200 years prior. So you're looking at 1371. All of the missals created in that 200-year span up to that declaration, he's basically saying like they're gone. You can no longer celebrate them. So that demonstrates, and unless the SSPX wants to deny the power of Pius V to do that, the Pope just annihilated, XYZ amount of liturgies. The SSPX would probably say it's because he can only do that because they're like not the true missal or something like that. Sure. Maybe, possibly. But I'm just saying he has the ability to eliminate, in theory, missals that come up that are used by the church and not necessarily wrong. He never mentions that they're wrong or mistaken. He wants to get rid of them. And then he allows for those with his approval to continue going that can prove that they're older than 200 years. So that's number one. Number two, he's actually going to produce what we now call the Tridentine Mass, which he is going to edit and revise that Mass, and he's going to make it like the universal Mass for the church. So the theory is, and speaking to the 200 years missal thing, people speculate like the 200-year thing is because like some liturgies had gotten polluted by Protestant and pre-Protestant ideas like the Hussites and stuff like that. I don't know if that's true, but that makes sense to me. So Pius V is going to kind of edit and revise and almost create, you could argue, a new Pius V missal that is probably similar to some sort of missal before the Council of Trent, but it's going to be his own thing. And he's going to pronounce that that is the universal missal for the Roman Catholic Church. Unless you can prove that yours is over 200 years old, that is the missal you have to use. And there are other rites that did survive. They're not really around anymore, like the Ambrosian rite is the one I always mention. There's another famous one. I always forget which one it's called, but the Ambrosian rite was around. It's like barely celebrated now, which is kind of wild. So he's going to have this Tridentine missal, this 1571. I can't remember the exact year. So fast forward to Vatican II. That's like literally what happened with Vatican II. Not literally, it's kind of different. But Vatican II is going to say we need a liturgical reform for whatever reason. The council is going to give a mandate in a way, sacrosanctum maybe is like the mandate for a revising of the liturgy. Paul VI is going to, in 1970, so this is not with Vatican II, which a lot of people say like Novus Ordo, which is what we call it. Probably not its real name. Maybe 1970 missal. It's not a directly Vatican II thing. Vatican II thing is sacrosanctum, which is, all these rules and desires for the liturgy. But that's going to give a mandate to Paul VI to revise the liturgy, which he announces or propounds or spreads. What's the right word I'm looking for? I forgot. Which is usually referred to as the Novus Ordo Mass. Now, am I saying that I like the Novus Ordo or I dislike it? No, I'm not putting a opinion out on that. I'm just saying this is how it happened. Right? And we just talked about how the Council of Trent and the Tridentine Missal came about. This is how the Novus Ordo came about. So does the Pope have the power to do that? Very similar to things there. Pius V revises and makes his own missal. Maybe very similar to what was before, maybe not. And I'm sure someone has some more information on that. And then Paul VI revises, makes a new missal, 1970. Some people still debate whether it's the same missal or it's like a revised missal or it's just a totally new missal. Either way, does the Pope have the power to do that? And that's what you have to wrestle with. And I think the SSPX would do a whole dance if they've even talked about this, where it's like, well, Pius V was doing it in the right way that we want. So like it was legit. Like he kept the specific things of the Latin Mass, whatever you want to call it, that has been around since the apostles, and therefore he was allowed to do it. Whereas we can disobey the Paul VI missal and the popes after him because he did changes that actually don't fulfill what's required of the liturgy in tradition. Which that's a crazy stance because they're basically saying that we have the knowledge, foresight, power, authority to declare what is essential in the Mass. It's not even, and most people will be like, well, the Novus Ordo is irreverent. All this. If whether that's true or not, it's like, do you have the power and authority to declare that even? To be like, what is in the Novus Ordo is improper to the liturgy? It might even be so. It might even be true, but do you have the authority and power to declare that? And that's what the SSPX is taking upon their shoulders. So the burden of proof is on them to somehow show that they have the ability to decide what is unchangeable in the church's liturgy. Even though popes in the past have changed the liturgy multiple times. And I'm just using Pius V because it's like far away and it has to do with the Tridentine Mass and has to do with the Council of Trent. But you can even go, before, and SSPX people will know this, right before the current missal that like FSSP uses, there were other modifications, revisions to that Tridentine missal. And it had been happening for hundreds of years. So they can't say it can't be edited. It's like they cannot be edited or changed in the way that they do not want it to be. And I probably agree with them on stuff like I don't want that to be changed. But the fact of the matter is like, who has the authority to decide whether you can or cannot change that? Does Pius V and Paul VI have that? Both saints, by the way. Or do random priests in the SSPX have that power? And I think that's just a crazy position to stand on. Okay. And then so that's one thing. And then the other thing I want to talk about, so whether they have the authority, the power to do what in theory only popes have been doing in the past. Not really only popes, bishops probably too have some freedom, but we're just talking about popes right now. Anyway, but then I also want to talk about schism. I'm like, how are they not in schism? So I usually use the Catechism of the Catholic Church from 1992, John Paul II, but I'm going to use the Baltimore Catechism. I know it's not authoritative. Like I was going to use the Roman Catechism, but I didn't. But even the Baltimore Catechism, which I think most SSPX people like, it talks about how schism is to refuse obedience to the lawful authorities of the church, particularly to the Pope. And then it says, and then the beginning of it is, a baptized person separates themselves from full incorporation in the mystical body by doing that, by refusing obedience to lawful authorities of the church, particularly to the Pope. So it's same meaning as the new catechism, just worded a little differently, but I'm going to use that because I'm like, do they even believe that the new catechism is legit? I don't even know. Some of the ones I've talked to, they do, except they're really mad about the death penalty thing, which is a whole other thing. And other stuff, actually. No, I shouldn't say that. I was misrepresenting them. They were mad about a bunch of stuff. Baltimore Catechism, though, similar definition. In theory to them, more based. Is like, what is schism? You are refusing obedience to the Pope. I'm going to use that because it's also bishops, people that are in communion with the Pope. And what are the SSPX doing? You can read that letter. They are basically saying, because of an emergency situation, we are being disobedient to the papacy. So where is that? Where is it not schism? That's what I would like to know. Where is it not schismatic? I know Pope Leo, because it gets a little complicated. I'm not going to get into the history of it, but they have been like publicly excommunicated, which I would argue you just like automatically excommunicated when you do some of the acts that they've done. That being said, they were refusing obedience to the Pope, and then the consecration will be like a next level thing, like it was in like 1988. But they're refusing obedience before, and I think the popes have just been super nice because that's what the post Vatican II church is, which has its positives and its negatives, but like super kind, super nice, super reserved. People are like, what about Traditionis Custodes? I'm like, even that was pretty nice. Like, I know it sucked for a lot of people, and I want to be sympathetic to that. And it was difficult, and it's not what I wanted. It's not what I wanted for the church, my personal opinion. But in the grand scheme of things, like the Pope has so much power, he did not have to play nice like that. He could just eradicate the Latin Mass. But Pope Francis didn't, even though people say he's like the most liberal Pope ever. Benedict didn't. Obviously, he opened it up more. John Paul II, you could argue, didn't really open it or close it more because people were confused about the status of the Latin Mass at that time, as far as I understand it. But that is schism. So I'm like, I don't know where we're getting another definition of what the position of the SSPX is. And to be honest, I did not look for that papal declaration or discussion of them being canonically irregular. So that's on me. But I was excited to get the show started, and I forgot. I totally forgot. But that's on the SSPX. So if any SSPX people can help me understand those things, because they don't like talking about definitions of stuff. They don't like talking about what is schism. And even though that I like the Latin Mass and I like the old ways of doing things, I don't think it's helpful if you're doing those things against the will of the Pope. That is actually not helpful. I think what the SSPX people should do is they should train their kids to become priests, diocesan, and in religious orders actually in the church, and that they should, it sounds crazy, but this is like what progressive and like, liberals have done, you could argue, or whoever you consider responsible for the infiltration of the church, whatever. But I want them to become priests and heads, obviously, if they're rational and good, in the Holy Catholic Church, in the actual church, and use their power to bring back those things that are good. Imagine if you got like a super, I don't even want to say it has bad connotations, but a rad trad pope. He has that power. He could literally change everything. So all of our arguments, discussions, complaining, whinings, legitimate concerns could all just be transformed by one person becoming pope. I've talked about power before. That's how it works. Anyway, we're gonna get moving because I could talk about that forever. But that's the SSPX thing. The letters, just a bunch of pointless stuff. Pastoral, great. Didn't seem like it helped a lot. We'll see if the consecrations go through. Next, I want to talk about the Supreme Court ruling very briefly. So there's a bunch of Supreme Court rulings this week because I think they're going into like recess or something like that. So they're going to take a break. So they got to get a bunch of stuff in before the break. And this Supreme Court ruling that I want to talk about was specifically about birthright citizenship. So a lot of people are not paying attention to this stuff. So this is like my appeal to people to like pay attention to politics and what's going on in terms of, because it's going to be important for the church and for the country, place you live, the world, because America's the strongest country on earth. But America, the Supreme Court of America, I think it was a 5-4 ruling with Kavanaugh doing like this split thing. So he's like kind of the 4, kind of the 6. I don't even remember. It might have been 6-3 actually, because there was one ruling that was 5-4, one ruling that was 6-3. Anyway, it passed, or they ruled that Trump's executive order about birthright citizenship would not stand. So what Trump was trying to do is eliminate this idea that if you're just born on the soil of the US, you're automatically a citizen. And I think there's just a common sense notion we can point to, like, that is not a good idea because it has to mean more to be an American. Like if like a Chinese spy is like visiting America and they like his wife has a baby, or she's probably a spy too, and his wife has, and her and him have a baby in America, is that baby American? And that's an aggressive example. But then you have this situation where people can just cross the border, have their baby, whether they love America, hate America, whether they even know how to speak English, they know the laws of America, they've ever contributed at all to the country, their kid will be considered an American. And I hope it's enough. I want to just mention that ruling. I'm not going to get super deep into it, but I hope the common sense aspect of that is enough to get people wondering like what the heck is going on right now. And the fact that like Trump is just doing crazy stuff, like this executive order was never going to stand. So it's like not very helpful. It's not very permanent. But just to give you an understand like what is going on in that situation. And like it's cool because I think this thing really unites the right, because there's a lot of different factions in the right now, but everyone seemed to be pretty upset about this, which I was glad about. And a big thing people were upset about was a judge appointed by Trump betrayed him. Barrett, one of the woman judge appointed by Trump, she went against Trump in this, and she went with the other side, I guess you could say, with Justice Roberts, who always goes with the other side, saying like, yeah, we're going to keep birthright citizenship. As long as you're born on the soil, you are a US citizen. So it's like, and I don't know all the technicalities of that, what that law looks like, where there's like, I don't even know how it's possible. It's like, oh, if you're on vacation, it doesn't count or something like that. But I do think this is harmful for any country. And I think it's harmful for the US because to be American has to mean more than you were just born there. I'm gonna stop there. I mean, not to get like Barack Obama being possibly born in Kenya, right? Did you guys remember that? Even he probably would have more of a claim to be an American than someone who just like some Middle Eastern person that crosses the border of Mexico into the US and has a baby. And we want to be sympathetic to Margaret. I'm not even going to do that right now. But we love all people. But Obama being raised by Americans he's more American than those people, even though like Trump was trying to get his ability to run for president expunged, I guess, by saying he was not an American citizen because he was born in Kenya. Kind of funny. But yeah, so it revolves. It's a common sense thing, but it revolves more around discussion of what it means to be American. And it's just like, oh, you're just born on the soil, and you just don't know anything about this country about. You don't. Yeah, I can get into controversial stuff like what does it mean to be American? It's like, is America a Christian country and stuff like that. We'll get into more of that. I've probably talked about that before. But anyway, we're gonna move on. That's the birthright thing. I just wanted to let you know what's going on with that. All right, we're gonna do the last two. It's just gonna be a long episode today. So Margaret Mary, or not Margaret Mary, Saint Margaret Clitherow is a saint. She's an English martyr, and I just wanted to mention her for everyone. I love her, but for the women out there, for the men out there, especially for the women, because I think she's like the female Thomas More, Saint Thomas More, and I love Thomas More. And I want to talk about two specific things that she was about. One thing is really interesting. Her biographers talk about was that she was very one sensitive to her neighbor's needs, and then two sensitive to her husband's desires, commands, needs. So in the first thing, there's an example that's really interesting that her biographers like kind of adamant to get out there is that she was very against her husband was a butcher, and she was very against his like his strong desires, I guess you could call it, to amass large amounts of wealth for himself. He was a very wealthy man. And she was trying to get him to give up parts of his business because she just felt like it was unnecessary for them to be making exuberant amounts of money. And he disagreed with her, so that did not happen. She was very obedient to her husband, who was not Catholic. He has actually left the Catholic faith for the Protestant, the Church of England faith, because it sounds like he didn't want to get fined and didn't want a hard life, basically. And then to show more an example, she didn't want him to be making much of money. It seemed like she thought that money making was harmful to his faith and harmful to even his leaving the faith and his inability to come back to the Catholic faith in England when they were being persecuted. And then also she did this thing apparently where when she was running the shop, because he had a butcher shop, when he was gone, he was buying cattle, doing that sort of thing. She would run the shop, and in the morning she would have a boy run around and see what the prices of the other butchers, because they all lived in the same place. It was kind of interesting. All the butchers were in the same part of the city. And he would run around and see the prices of the other butchers, and she would match their price. So she wouldn't like go super above them, and she wouldn't like, price cut them, go under them. She would just do the same price as them always. And she thought that was an important thing to do in solidarity with them, to be fair to them. So that was really interesting. And the main point of that is like, think about how our economy works, how we deal with money, how we deal with business. This is very foreign to how we operate because we don't live in a Catholic country. We live in a Protestant Jewish country. That is a foreign concept to those religions, or to that religion, and to those religions. The cohesiveness of society is not dependent on competitiveness, at least the Catholic argument, not based on competitiveness and like cutthroat economics. It is a community, and you do want to provide a good product, but you also want to take care of each other. You don't want to be rapacious or anything like that. So I thought it was a really cool example of like England post the Church of England, King Henry doing his thing, and then a Catholic trying to live in the old Catholic way, which is pretty cool. The other thing she talks about, and I think I can probably bring a quote here. She was very obedient to her husband, and this is a difficult situation for her because she converted to the Catholic faith. She wasn't raised Catholic, but like back to the faith of her fathers. And her husband had been raised Catholic and left the Catholic faith. So, and she understands that in matters of religion, she has to be disobedient to her husband because that's to God. But in everything else, she has to be obedient to him. And this is a quote from her. She said, "Know you that I love him next unto God in this world. If I've offended my husband in anything but for my conscience, but for my religious duty, I ask God and him for forgiveness." So just a beautiful testimony to her love for her neighbor and her obedience and love to her husband. Doesn't mean she wasn't like a firecracker. She is so funny. She is so witty. That's why I kind of compare her to Thomas More. Not only both English martyrs, but they just have this wit that is awesome, this joy that is really cool. People love to be around them, but she just had this true desire to serve her neighbor, to be a true Catholic in economics, and also a true Catholic in her devotion, obedience, love for her husband, even though he wasn't even Catholic. He was a fallen away Catholic. So yeah, I just want to shout her out. There's a couple of biographies about her. This one is by Margaret T. Monroe, which is kind of cool. She has the same name as the saint. Definitely worth a read just to kind of get not only about Saint Margaret, but also about just the situation in England. Let me talk to you about this. It's made me a little sad because we have this phrase in the church, which I think is true, is like the seed of the church is the blood of them, or the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And I love the English martyrs, but the fact of the matter is like those English martyrs, they suffered and died, and the church was the Catholic faith in England was basically eradicated from England, even with those martyrdoms. So it's like, it's sad to me because those people, they did give their lives, and, God has a plan. He's working. It might come back, in the future, the Catholic faith in England, but it's not like a cut and dry thing. There's a deeper, more complex thing that we can never understand. But the faith was, and this should put fear, the fear of God into our hearts. Like the faith was basically eradicated in England by violence, by treachery, by economic means, by fear. So we have to stand staunch. And I see ways that people are trying to eradicate the Catholic faith, even in America, even though it's booming kind of in America, how people are trying to eradicate it. So we have to be aware. We have to be smart. It's not enough to just, how should I say this? Like, it's not enough to just pray devotions. You got to be like a serpent, like our Lord says. You have to be simple as a dove, wise as serpents. And I think that is a real thing. And then I guess it could be a double-edged sword because then you cut yourself because you're trying to be too duplicitous and you sin. Don't sin, but we got to be smart. That's St. Margaret Clitherow. Last subject. How long have we been going here? This is a little bit longer of an episode. Last thing I want to talk about is gas in the US. And I'm not going to get super deep into this, but if you live in America, you've probably noticed that the gas prices have been fluctuating a lot. And that is obviously in relation to the Strait of Hormuz closing, which is obviously related to us and Israel in this interesting type of war with Iran. 20% of the world's energy supply, or I believe it's 20%, flows through the Strait of Hormuz. So that's a huge disruption in the energy supply. What's been happening over the last 3 months, 4 months, is that back and forth, we've been at active war with Iran, and then we've been kind of like on a back foot, but still in tensions with Iran. And there's been ceasefires and peace deals and MOUs and all this stuff. And we've talked about this before. Like, you cannot be fooled. Like, there is not going to be a pretty solution to this. And I think Trump is really stuck here. But with the gas prices, what's been happening is people don't understand how bad the gas prices would be if the US was not draining its reserves, its petroleum reserves. And this is something that's been touched upon by, the great political commentators of our time. And then it's also being hidden by, you just have these conservative just shills that they just shill this specific angle. They don't ever get into the facts. They hide things. They obfuscate. One of these is going to be Benny Johnson. You could even argue like people, Candace Owens is not really like a political commentator in that way, but there are a lot of shills out there. DC Drano is probably another one. Ben Shapiro, obviously, but he's not even a shill. He's more of an Israel shill. But they're not talking about this fact. So people are just seeing gas prices go up and down. They're not understanding why this is. The US has been draining its petroleum reserves. And we keep gasoline in reserve in the US for emergencies, different things like that. And Trump has been ordering the at different times the release of those reserves into the market. So that has like calmed the expenses of gasoline, which it even in a lot of places over $5. So it didn't even help that much. But imagine if we had not released those. But what's happening, and like people like Nick Fuentes have covered this, and other people, I'm not going to mention all the people. What's happening is that those reserves are getting relatively low. It's hit a 40-year low. Last time it was this low was when 1983. And you can look that up. It's a quick Google search. So what's going to happen is eventually there's going to get to a point where it's like, well, we need to have a certain amount of reserves for an emergency situation. When are we going to stop letting go of these reserves into the market? And when that happens, you're going to see an insane spike in the price. If they cannot get the Strait of Hormuz open, because it's closed again, people stop paying attention because they're not constantly bombing each other, right? Iran's not constantly sending missiles in. We're not constantly bombing them. Bombing is still going on, but it's not constant like it was in the beginning. So people have totally forgotten this. And I speculate, as other people have speculated, this is going to turn into a huge economic crisis if they cannot get the Strait of Hormuz open soon. Because we're going to have to make a decision to either keep releasing those reserves, and that will run out eventually. We're at, I don't even know, it's like at 300 million something barrels, which sounds like a lot, but that will not last a long time. We use like, I forgot the number. I think it's like 20 or 50 million barrels per week in the US. So you can do the math on that. Might have been more than that. You can Google it, look it up. But if this continues and the Strait of Hormuz is not open, we're going to run out of reserves to kind of calm the rising gas prices. Those gas prices are going to shoot up. That's going to affect everything that you buy. And in theory, will cause a little bit of an economic, a boo-boo, sometimes called a recession, because energy is that important. And in the last like 5-6 years, we've had a ton of that stuff, including the war in Ukraine. So I'm not like nervous. I mean, I'm a little nervous about it, but I don't think people are fully understanding this. This to me feels a little bit, I was too young in 08, but what I've read about it is like no one seems to have realized what was happening in 08. And people were kind of ignoring maybe the obvious telltale signs of that. I won't speak from experience, but now it's like the warning. I'm sounding the warning, other people sounding the warning that this could get real ugly. And think of a country that has to ration oil, has to ration gasoline. That is no bueno. And the US has had to do it before. So don't get me wrong, it's not like a new thing. But people are not going to have fun. And Trump is trying to find a way out, and he cannot. He is unable to find a way out. He just put himself in a terrible situation. And Iran just the other day was bombing ships in the Strait because Oman was trying to let them go through on their side. And Iran was like, no go. So we'll see what happens. But that's the gasoline situation. And I was thinking this might have one positive effect, because if people think this is going to happen over a long period of time, this might force the US to do more of our own oil acquisition. I know we just got Venezuela, but that's going to take a long time. Anything we do will take a long time, but it might be helpful in the future, this shock. But this is going to be no bueno. I'm calling it right now. Other people have called it, so I'm not like some seer. I'm just listening to what other people say, looking at the facts that they're bringing up. But yeah, I do think this is more important. And I just hear people, I don't think they're not understanding it. They're getting their information from just these shills. They're not backgrounding what's really going on, the numbers of things. So yeah, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope all of us are wrong, but I don't think we're wrong. So even if the Strait opened today, there's speculation that it's going to be a tough second half of the year. So that's that. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns. Share the video if you'd like, if you think it was fun, it was good. We talked about a lot today. It's probably one of the longest news episodes I've done. But yeah, I was just excited because there's a lot going on. I even had other stuff, but I was just like, they're not as important, so I didn't want to cover them. But yes, please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think about the show, and I will see you tomorrow, God willing. God bless you. God be with you, and goodbye.